Okay, everyone, this is Heidi Munieso-Kunzman with the Community and Rural Development Institute at Cornell University, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on understanding and using demographic data. And I just want to thank you again for your patience. We last half hour, but hopefully have it resolved. So this is the fourth of 6 webinars in our spring 2009 and wind energy in June. At the end of today's webinar, we will share a list of other webinars in the series and information about. Those of you who may not be familiar with the sustainable developed with the recognition that we're really in a time of flux. There's both great challenges for communities and lots of opportunities. So the series is designed to address topics of interest to New York communities and the extension educators and other community developers working with them, as well as legislators and other local leaders. So with each webinar, we're trying to bring together a campus-based researcher, extension professional, a community-based practitioner, and subject matter and resources for further information. So really, these are designed to be overviews to get you started, to help. I want to thank Robin Blankley, who is an extension associate, for leading today's session, and Rod Howe will be joining us as well. I also want to quickly remind you of the things Robin in using demographic data for a number of Robin will be engaging us in addressing several questions. Where does the data come from? Where can we find data? And how do we interpret this data, which I think is the webinar will last approximately 1.5 hours. Chat box on the left side of the webinar screen to post questions, and when possible we'll address them as we go along. We'll also plan on addressing others at the end. We're already using the chat box.
Can you hear me now? Heidi was using a different microphone. This is Robin. How does it sound now? Sounds yes, better. Okay, good. Okay, thanks for bearing with us. Rod, do you want to say any comments before we get started? Okay. Hi folks, this is Robin Blakely. I'm really pleased to see a number of names out there that I recognize, and look forward to getting to know some of the folks that I don't recognize your names yet. As Heidi mentioned, we're going to be trying to cover a lot of material, and I hope it's not maddeningly superficial. As I said to her and Rod, that any of these slides that I'm going to present, each of them could represent an entire workshop in and of themselves. So what we're really trying to do today is give you an overview. So I do want to have just a general discussion about basic demographic data, where to find it, how some groups have used this data for planning, but I don't intend or fantasize that this is going to make you an expert user. In fact, many of you may already be quite proficient users, so I do hope you find something beneficial from this webinar today. But at least this should be a good starting point for you. There's just a ton of data out there, and a lot of times that can be very overwhelming and intimidating. So at least I want to point you to some useful places, useful sites to just get you started. I would also very much appreciate getting feedback from you all, whether it's in the form of questions throughout the presentation. We'll stop a couple times or at the end, or you can email me directly, and I would really like to hear some feedback on what would have made this a better webinar, or if there's particular topics that you would like to see covered in detail in a future webinar. A lot of the material today comes out of a new program area in CARDI called VIEW. The acronym stands for Vital Indicators for Enhanced Well-Being. You'll see on several of these slides that I have live web links. Unfortunately, we were not able to figure out the technology to click on the links and show you the website. So while we'll have the webinar posted to the CARDI website, we will also post this PowerPoint presentation that will include all these web links for you. So I'm encouraging you at a later date to go back through this PowerPoint and click on the web links so that you can see some examples of what I'm talking about. The VIEW program really comes out of an awareness of the communities, local leaders, organizations need data. They need data for program planning, to evaluate their progress on particular projects, to do comprehensive planning, to apply for grants, etc. We all need data, but there's just a ton of data out there, and as I said, it's very overwhelming. What we're trying to do in the VIEW project is lead people through the steps that you would take when you're starting out a comprehensive plan or writing a grant application, etc. What kind of questions should you be asking? What kind of data should you look for? Where are some useful sites? Things to think about, caveats when looking at change over time, etc. And we also have a pretty strong training component to this project, and so this webinar is really one of the first steps towards that. So the overview today, what we'll do is we'll talk about a little bit about each of these items, what we need data for, how do we know what data to look for, where does the data come from, and we'll focus on the census. There's a ton of data out there, but I'll focus on the census today. Where can we find this data? And I'll point you to some key websites. I'll also bring up a couple cautions when interpreting data and measuring change over time, and then we can discuss some examples of using this data at the local level. So what do we need data for? As I said before, local leaders increasingly need access to data for effective planning, to secure funding, and to evaluate progress. And there's just so much data on the web. It's not just about accessing data anymore. It's about what is appropriate to use. Where do I find it? How can I download it? What's the appropriate use and interpretation? Now, data allows us to establish baseline measures. So we're answering the question, what's our current status? It helps us to measure trends over time. We can use data to compare our communities and our organizations with each other and others. It can help us establish goals for the future, and it help us evaluate progress towards those goals. But how do we know what data to look for? And it really depends on the question being asked. If you're applying for a grant and you need to give specific data on poverty, that's a little bit more straightforward than if you're asked to give information on the quote-unquote low-income population. It would really depend on what you termed low-income population in your community. Poverty rates are official, federally established poverty rates. You might want to look at a proxy versus an actual. For example, instead of looking at actual poverty rates, maybe if you're interested in particularly interested in child poverty, you might look at percent free or reduced school lunch usage in your school district versus just the actual poverty rate. Sometimes we're interested in using indices or an index instead of an actual data point. So for example, if you're trying to get a handle on what's the well-being of our community. I mean, well-being is a very broad concept, and for every community or every organization, it could mean different things to different people. And so the data that you use to measure that can really shift. And the steps to take, first of all, is sort of trying to make it a little bit more linear and straightforward in terms of what data should you be looking for. What are your goals specifically? If you identify the goals first off, that makes it a little bit easier. So in this example, I've shown your goal for your community may be better health or lower crime rates. And so with those goals in mind, you'd identify some indicators. So for example, using that better health goal, you might want to use an indicator such as blood pressure or weight or levels of obesity, etc. And then this leads you to the actual data that you collect. So the data is what you actually count to measure that concept. Now, a lot of communities and organizations may start this process with very specific goals in mind, and so that sometimes is a fairly easy, straightforward process. So they start with their goals, they develop some indicators, and that leads them to different types of data that they want to collect, the measurements. Other communities, other organizations may not have clear-cut goals. They may be starting with questions of, what does our community look like? Where have we come from? Where are we projected to go? In terms of, what are the issues that we might be looking at down the road? They may not have clear-cut goals, so they may start with the data step to actually just collect data, and by analyzing some of the data, be able to identify some of the issues and challenges that are facing their community, and then their goals come out of that step. That leads them to then want to collect more data specifically. Now, where does the data come from? Now, today I'm just going to focus on the decennial census. I'm sure most, if not all of you, know that there's many, many, many sources of data. I'm going to focus on the census because overall, it's considered the gold standard. It's available for multiple levels of geography. It's a source of data over time that's really held up, as I said, as the gold standard. But if you're familiar with the census data, it will help you become a little bit more comfortable using other data sets. Now, why do we take a census? Well, the census has really been in the news lately for political reasons, because it is used, the total 100% count of the census is used for congressional reapportionment. It's also used for state and local redistricting, and then the big dollar signs for state and federal fund allocation. But as you know, it's also used for planning and research, among other reasons. I like this slide because a lot of people are not aware that census data is available at many, many levels of geography. It's not just available for the nation, for states, for counties and towns, etc. This graphic shows all the levels of geography that you can tabulate census data at, that it's actually available on the Census Bureau website. So for instance, if you're in a county with 2 or 3 school districts and you wanted to look at how the census data varied across school districts, you can go in and look at it by school district. So there's governmental political units, there's administrative units, so such as school districts and zip codes, and then statistical units, which tends to be a little bit more confusing to the first-time user: census tracts, block groups, blocks, metro areas, and urban and rural. Now, what data is collected? Here we have some live links that we won't be able to use, but the short form is what everyone receives. The short form. Every 10 years the census is conducted, and everyone receives, well, 9 out of 10, or actually in rural areas more than that. But most people receive the short form, which only has 6 population items and 1 housing item. And if you're interested in actually looking at the form, the link is right there. Now, the sample, 1 in 6 households will receive what's called the long form, and that is where the real wealth of data, the real wealth of information comes from, that most of you will probably be interested in. So I really encourage you to check out these links that I've provided. And so you'll be surprised, I'm sure, at some of the items that are collected on the census. Now, most of you have probably heard a little bit about the American Community Survey. The American Community Survey is going to replace the long form. Now, I'm not even going to go into the political reasons for this, but apparently they think it's going to be a cost savings and yield better data over the long term. What's nice about the American Community Survey is that there'll be a continual data collection process. It's an ongoing data collection process, whereas the decennial census is only once every 10 years. And it will have the breadth and depth of sociodemographic and other information that was collected on the long form. I want to say a little bit more about this. So beginning with the 2005 data, which was already collected, and there's a website at the bottom of the screen that you should go and check out, the American Community Survey data. The ACS provides annual characteristic data for communities of 65,000 or more population. Now in New York State, the ACS now provides characteristics for 38 counties, 7 cities, and 16 towns on an annual basis. Now, to obtain reliable small area estimates from the American Community Survey, the Census Bureau is using data gathered over a 3-year period. So in December 2008, the Census Bureau released the first estimates for all communities of 20,000 or more population, and those are based on 3-year estimates. So there's sort of an average between 2005 to 2007. So there's pros and cons of this, whereas in the decennial census you had a point in time, April of, say, 2010, that's when the data was collected. For the American Community Survey, it's more of an average of over a time period. Now in December 2010, the ACS estimates will be based on a 5-year period, and then those ones will include all geographic areas, regardless of size. So those of you that are working in rural areas, you'll be working with sort of a 5-year estimate rather than the decennial census. Rod, do you want to chime in?
So, Robin, does that mean the information for rural towns will be less reliable than for the larger units in New York State?
There's going to be, on the slide it says issues of data comparability and statistical error, without making our eyes roll back in our head with statistics. It does bring up a lot of issues about particularly for rural areas, that there's a much higher margin of error or confidence interval associated with those estimates. So if you're comparing change, and I say change, quote unquote, over time for these rural areas, you're going to have to really pay attention when you're using ACS data. There's going to be a plus or minus, 5% or 6% associated with those data. So if you see a change, it looks like your population has increased by 4 percentage points over a time period, but it says plus or minus 6%, you can't really say that true change has actually occurred. So there's going to be a lot of caveats in using this data. Now, again, the web link that I've provided on this slide will give you some more background information. And on the VIEW website, we're also going to be posting, there's a really nice report, I think it actually is by the Census Bureau, on using this data and what to look out for. So if you're comparing moving forward in 2010 onward, but you want to compare how your community is faring compared to 1990 or 1980 census, there are some things you will have to keep in mind, and particularly for rural areas. We can't go to these links right now, but I again encourage you to check out these 2 sites. The first one, for using the census data effectively, is a great website. It's on the Census Bureau's main website, but here they show case studies of how census data was used in business planning, in grant applications, just many different ways at the local level. The census site that I've shown also has some tutorials that are well worth your time in using this data. They also have some tutorials for mapping some of the data. So I just suggest you spend some time and just kind of play around with that website. There's a lot there. The next one, the examples from the American Community Survey, how communities are using the ACS for informed strategic planning, is also a really nice example. They have, I think, 5 different communities profiled in this report. One is a rural area in Pennsylvania, which used some of the ACS data for grant application on transportation needs for the elderly. So it might just get your imagination flowing and how you can use this data in your community or in your organization. So where do we find the census data? Well, here's the basic Census Bureau URL. It can be a little intimidating when whoops, I've lost my screen, Heidi. Sorry folks, hold on. I just clicked down and don't have anything left on this screen. It should be showing these screens. I wonder if it's just moving very, very slowly because
I think it's set up so you have
Okay.
to click each one.
do I click
Yes.
here? I don't understand. Bear with us, folks. Sorry about this.
Try it again.
I wonder if it's
You need to click for each one.
But I
Animation
should-
doesn't work here very well.
okay. Mike is saying
Keep hitting the right
keep
arrow.
using the right arrow. Thanks, Mike. I've hit it. Okay, you probably see these little red circles. Okay, well, what you're not seeing, I apologize. Okay, what you didn't see, and believe me, it was there, but we'll have this PowerPoint posted to the View website, and you shouldn't have the difficulty in downloading it. What I wanted to do was take you right to the Census Bureau website. So when you go to www.census.gov, you see this opening page, and those red circles were highlighting things that I really wanted you to pay attention to if it's your first of few visits to the website. American Fact Finder is an area that you definitely want to visit. The fact sheet section on the left-hand side. The other website that I gave you too with the case studies has a nice tutorial too that'll help you. And then all the red arrows that you saw I was hoping to walk you through using some of the tables, but again, if you access this PowerPoint and just download the PowerPoint, you will be able to see those. Okay, let's see. The next thing that I wanted to point you to was also the New York State Data Center. Many of you may be linked in with the New York State Data Center, maybe on their listservs, and get continual updates on where the census is at, where the American Community Survey is at. They are an amazing resource for data, for technical assistance. Please visit this website, and they can provide you with population projections for the state, for counties, etc.
You might mention the relationship we have with the director.
Do you want to?
No, you know more about Bob.
Bob Scardamelia is the director of the New York State Data Center, and he's has a long time relationship with Cornell, and is really committed to helping the affiliates, which is the next slide that I want to show to you, provide stellar data to counties and regions. Many of you may be aware of your regional planning councils too that are linked in with the New York State Data Center. Some of you are not, though, I'm sure, and these regional planning councils should also be viewed as a really great resource for data or technical assistance. So if you're in a county or a community and you're trying to find data that's not on the census site, that might be more locally relevant or regionally relevant, and you're having trouble finding that, the regional planning councils may be a very good place to check in with. There are also the county planning agencies, and then the metro planning organizations.
Robin, I just want to let you know that we have
You
a
have to.
question.
I'm sorry, you have to speak.
I just wanted to let you know that we have a question. If you saw that, what do you think of dataplace.org?
I'm not familiar with that. We'll write that down and dataplace.org. I will check that out. No comment.
Robin, this points to one of the things that we might want to consider on as we mature the View website, on the CARDI website, is have our frequently asked questions, or allow people to ask you questions like that, so you can, give some input about something like dataplace.org.
That's a great idea. Another resource is the Cornell program on applied demographics. And I again encourage you to check out this web link. I'm sorry that we can't show it for you, but here they have very, very nice graphical presentations of data for each county on a lot of economic and social characteristics, labor force characteristics, commuting patterns, etc. This is where you can also get population projections. They work very closely with the New York State Department of Economic Development and the Census Bureau. And they also teach some very good workshops too. So if you're in the Cornell community, you could access those.
And for any of you who are in one of the 13 counties that we call the Pipeline for Progress region, we worked with the Program on Applied Demographics to put together a very nice publication on industry sectors in those 13 counties. So if anyone wants that, just send me an email at RLH13 and I'll get you a copy of that report that covers the 13 counties and the P4P region, which is basically the southern tier.
Okay. So again, the Census Bureau, the census data was the one that I was using as an example, and unfortunately I wasn't able to show you the website and some of the data that's there. Again, I encourage you to spend some time just perusing it and becoming more comfortable with it. But there is a lot of other data that's not collected by the Census Bureau and may have the specificity that you need for specific projects in your community and in different topic areas. So these two links are essentially laundry lists of several, actually many different data sites, and maybe dataplace.org is one of them, and I just missed it. But they're organized by topic area. So for instance, if you're interested in statistics on crime or disability or poverty or housing, you can go to these lists and they will point you to different data sources within those topical areas. So these were just two of, again, many lists that are out there, and we will be posting these to the VIEW website. So this is a good resource as well. This slide is a little dense, but I really had to include it because a lot of organizations and communities, well, most of you will be looking at change over time. And there are a lot of issues that come up when you're comparing change over time, that you may be either hiding change, so the change actually occurred but you're not capturing it, or change didn't really occur, but for some reason the data seems to suggest that change did occur. And things that can contribute to this are the changes in the survey or sample size. So if you're not working from 100%, such as just the count of the census, anytime you're working with a sample survey, if there's a change in that universe, that can lead to distorting change. Is that change statistically significant? That was another thing I brought up with the American Community Survey. So you have to look at margins of error and confidence intervals to see if change actually did occur or if it's just sort of the statistical noise. Were there changes in the way that the data was collected? Did the survey instrument itself change? Were there changes in how the data was tabulated? New questions were added, or the questions might have been slightly different in the wording. Even the order of questions in a survey can lead to different outcomes. If you're working at the town level, for example, too, and you know that boundaries can shift over time, so if you're looking at change from 1970 through 80 through 90 through 2000, etc., but the actual physical boundaries of your geography have shifted, you need to take that into account. And then even just comparing the census from one period to another can lead to problems. So for example, from 1990 to 2000, most of us are aware that the way the Census Bureau asked the questions about race changed dramatically. Census 2000 was the first time where respondents were able to indicate or self-identify as more than one racial group. So if you're comparing changes in, say, the African American population or the Asian population between 1990 and 2000, 1990 it was tabulated one way, and 2000 was tabulated another way. So there's just some other examples there that you need to keep in mind when you're looking at change over time. But a community profile really is a good way for you to start. Did you want to chime in?
Well, I think, Robin, that last slide was more just to make sure people, not that we're expecting folks to be statisticians, but to be aware that they should look at data, especially comparing data over time, with kind of a critical eye.
Absolutely, because I think oftentimes, even when I say the census is the gold standard, I mean, there's no data source out there that's absolutely perfect. And that even if they have measured a concept fairly accurately, how you're interpreting it and how you're comparing it to, say, another another level of geography or another time point can be problematic. So you just have to be really careful in how you're using the data too and interpreting. And someone gives you a report, you always have to use a critical eye. Okay, many of you may have already done community profiles. Many of you are possibly wondering, well, what should go into a community profile? How do we go about that? And again, we're not going to go into this in any great detail, but it's a really good way to at least start identifying some of the challenges and issues that your community might face. So I would encourage you to first start in a very basic manner, going to the Census Bureau website and choosing Fact Sheet. Now this is on, I believe, the left-hand side of the site. And you can just input your city or your town, your county, your zip code, and you also have to identify the state that you're in. And the census data will pop up, and oftentimes you'll have more recent data than just the year 2000. You may have some American Community Survey data that's available for your level of geography. It's pretty straightforward in how to print or download this data. The first round is just very, very basic sort of sociodemographics, but you can always choose more detail, and again on that left-hand side you can choose more detail in the people, housing, or business and government sections.
Robin, will that allow you to develop a profile that will show change over time? Like, could you say, show me from 1990 to 2000, or will it just give you one?
It'll just, well, you can choose. So if there is American Community Survey data available for, say, 2007, or then you can also select 2000 data. But again, how you're measuring change over time between the census data and the ACS, you have to do that cautiously. But you can also access 1990 data on the Census Bureau website, old data sets too.
Bev, did that address your question?
Same question as Rod.
Yeah, I think so.
So you have to dig a little bit more deeply. I wish I could actually go to the site and I could point you to where the other data sets. There is a section that says data sets, and if you click on that, you'll see that there's 1990 data and then older data. The regional planning councils are also very good at helping folks through this. I've had some very good experience with them. So if you're kind of stuck in how to grab all this data and put it into one place, they might be able to help you as well. Oops. I wanted just to show you this one example of, is there anybody from Tioga County here? Do you remember? No. Cardi worked with a group in Tioga County called the Sustainable Tioga Project, and they were working on sort of a long-term, I think it was a 20 or 30-year plan, trying to identify, well, what are the issues that we're going to be facing as a county over the next few decades? What are the issues? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And so we started with a very basic data profile of the county. They didn't have goals in mind when they started out the project, but we compared a lot of the data for Tioga County to counties around them so that they could nest their data in a context. We used census data. We also used the county level population projections from the State Data Center. We looked at the demographic trends, and by going through this exercise, there were a lot of light bulbs that went off the very first time we all looked at this together. It was pretty amazing of some of the challenges that were pretty immediately evident when we looked at this data. So I just wanted to show you a few slides from that project. Again, very simple slides, but show you some of the questions that were raised. Oh. And we don't see the slide. Oh dear.
Can you click it again and see what happens?
No. Okay, I'm sorry folks, what we're not seeing is the actual data, which is going to make this a little difficult. Let me see if I can just walk through this verbally. So imagine, if you will, that Tioga County data, what we did is we compared Tioga to all the counties that bordered it. So Chemung, Tompkins, Broome, and Cortland, and also Bradford County, which is in Pennsylvania. So don't forget about, if you are on the edge of the state, to compare yourself to counties in other states as well. And we looked at, first of all, just the basic population trends in Tioga County. And Tioga County is projected to lose over 10,000 people in the next 20 years, which was similar to some of the counties in the region, but not all the counties. So they were actually losing at a quicker rate than some of the surrounding counties. Then we started looking at not just population projections as a whole, the population as a whole, but we started breaking it down by age group. So we started looking at the population of those under the age of 5. And Tioga County was projected to lose a ton of preschool age kids. Now, was it that the preschool age kids were all packing up their suitcases and leaving? No, people were starting to get savvy at this point and say, well, no, their parents are probably leaving. Is it the brain drain, etc.? What we then did is said, okay, well, you just looked at numbers in the last graphs, numbers of people, but when we look at the population as a whole, it's important to look at proportion of population. So it makes it a little easier, particularly when you're comparing your organization or your community to other communities, to start looking at it proportionately or in percentage terms. So when we did this, Tioga County was actually very similar, while not in scale, but in proportion, not in size, but in proportion to the other counties in terms of their preschool age projected population loss. We then looked at the population aged 25 to 44 and saw in Tioga County that these numbers were also projected to go down, quite similar to the surrounding counties. But what were the implications of this? Now, Tioga County was one of the issues that they were facing is, well, we have a lack of economic development. We really want to focus on that in this project. But with the numbers of 25 to 44-year-olds declining, and also as a proportion of the total population, this had some major labor force issues for them. And again, we also looked at the proportion of the population aged 45 to 64. We saw that that was going to increase initially, but then decline by 2030. And getting them to start talking about some of the implications of that population shift in the county. What would that do to their economic development base, their tax base, etc.?
Robin, that's a good stopping point for just a second.
You're going to have to talk into this microphone. Sorry, Heidi has a...
It's okay. No, I'm just following up with a question. What are the factors used to estimate the population projections?
Okay. The population projections, again, the State Data Center puts these out. They look at the basic components would be what the current age structure is in terms of women in their childbearing years, what the average number of children that they're having, but they do also look at, and mortality, of course, phases in that, factors into that, migration patterns, in and out migration, and I do believe that they use some building permits, and they do look at past population trends, so there's a whole algorithm, and the State Data Center, I think they have a section on this of what factors into the population projection. So it's not just, oh, we've increased by 10% over the last 2 years or last 10 years. I'm sure the population will continue at that rate. No, it's an actual, what are the components of change in the population?
And Robin, I probably shouldn't be mentioning this since you can't see the images, but the point I want to make is that as any of you might be working with community groups or elected officials, we know that sometimes the images of the data can be more impactful than just looking at a list of, the age of a narrative form. And I'm recalling that recently when we saw the program on applied demographics did a seminar recently, and I think it was Ulster County, that showed the population estimates from 0 to 10, the whole age range, and you saw that it was an aging population. I mean, just the way that the diagram laid out, which made, I think, on all of us a really stark demonstration of what's happening in that county.
Right. I think too the use of graphics is really an important tool too. That you can have all these tables, and if you're presenting data to a larger group or a committee or in a grant application, that's one thing. You definitely want the data, but in numerical form, but by showing it in a graph, you get the point across very, very quickly. And most people who are not comfortable looking at numbers are much more comfortable looking at a trend line or a bar chart, etc. And so you can really underscore the importance of a trend or the significance of a trend by showing it in graphical form, which unfortunately we're not able to show you today. So, but this was with this project we were working with a group. Was it a steering committee, or I can't remember the term?
It was a leadership program.
That's right,
in
leadership
Tioga
program.
County. So it pulled together a group of self-identified leaders. There was an application process, and they went through kind of a curriculum to think about community and economic development, but they heard from lots of local business leaders about what their experience was, and were able to kind of set it in the context of some of the trends that Robin is talking about. And then I think getting a better sense of using the data, they went ahead and actually kind of did not quite a feasibility study, but went after getting broadband access for the entire county. So they did quite a bit of research into using this kind of information and having the skills to do so.
And I think part of the project too was that they knew that the county had some issues, that things were not going along as they wanted, but they weren't quite able to identify, as a group anyway, what those, or have consensus, that was the important point, have consensus around what those issues were. And by starting out with a community profile and having everyone at the table when that data was analyzed and then presented, particularly graphically, then there was that sense of urgency that they all shared, and okay, this is what the projections are showing. Are we prepared for this? And particularly with the labor force issue, the labor force age population projected to decline, and then these graphics that you can't see as I'm flicking through of the aging population projected to increase dramatically. And now, of course, this is a national trend, but in particular areas of New York State, certain communities and counties, the aging population is projected to increase way beyond even national averages. And so just even that fairly simple demographic trend sets up a lot of issues and challenges for communities, and also some opportunities too if approached correctly. Let's see. So I'm going to be wrapping up actually quite a bit ahead of schedule because we weren't able to look at some of these web links. So I would invite Rod and Heidi too to talk about any specific projects that they know of where some data was used strategically. But things that I would just encourage you to consider when you're starting with a community profile, as I hope to have showed you a little bit more clearly with the Tioga example, is that the current data is the first step, but it doesn't provide much context, that you do need comparison points. So if Tioga County had just looked at themselves over time, that would have been informative, but they really needed to ask the question, how do we compare to the region as a whole? Do we fit the profile? Where are we outliers, etc.? And not just current data, but they needed data from the past. Can I just turn that? They needed data from the past to establish what the trends were. And also we did have access to some projections, at least with age structure and population data. There are going to be times where you don't have the data that you're looking for available, or you don't have projections for that data. So you will have to be a bit creative, shall we say. So there are limitations to some data points. Projections are not always available. And as we walked through the Tioga example, I'd hope to show you a little bit more clearly that starting with the community profile, it will bring to light some of the implications as you discuss with your group, as you're looking at the data. There's going to be implications of these trends if they actually do come to pass. What are the challenges and opportunities for a community if these trends continue? And back to where we started at the beginning of the presentation. Now, if you remember that we talked about how data can help you reach your goals, but have you formulated new goals because of the data that you've seen? If your community started off without clear-cut goals, do you have new goals because of the data you've seen? Or if you did have clear-cut goals, have they shifted? And I actually, on this chart, on this slide too, I said if you don't like where the projections suggest you're headed, can you develop goals and action steps to lead you in a different direction? So for example, if Tioga County sees that their labor force population is projected to decline by X%, are there steps that they can take to sort of minimize that? It's not a crystal ball. Perhaps there are things that intervening mechanisms that can be put in place to slow that decline. And then how do you create benchmarks and track your progress on your goals?
I would just add, related to Tioga County, that was exactly where they were going, I think, with trying to bring the broadband in, is feeling like in order to meet the needs of current industries and businesses, having ready access to broadband throughout the county was really, really important. So I would say that there.
Well, and Robin, it goes back to one of your early slides for me where I think the data can be used to help set some goals, but then you can turn around and the community can decide what data they're going to use to track the progress toward wherever they've decided they want to go. So I forget which slide it was, but toward the beginning. The other things that I just want to emphasize that you said, I think it's really important to look at your community or county in a regional context. So I think it's really beneficial, as you did in Tioga County, to see, well, is this a trend that's happening in the surrounding counties as well? Because the approach might be very different if it seems to be only in your county where some trend is happening versus it's a regional trend.
Right.
For those of you in the North Country, we did some reports similar to what we did in the P4P region, and I think that's actually on the CARDI website as a CARDI report. It just shows some basic socioeconomic graphic information for the North Country counties. So I like this idea of doing more work regionally. The other thing that I just want to mention is we're very interested in looking at this issue of community capacity, and we've had some discussions with the office that that takes the applications for HUD funding. It used to be the Office of Small Cities. I think they've changed their name slightly. They're now housed within the New York State Department of Housing and Community Renewal. But they have told us that there are many counties or many communities eligible for their funds, but those communities never even apply. And we think it gets back to kind of a capacity issue, and that there might be some communities that don't have the wherewithal to even put in a grant application, especially when it has to include finding data where you develop a profile of your community. So, we think that some of you are on the phone or on the webinar in a good position to go back to some of your municipal leaders, clerks, others who might be in a position of pulling those grants together and just sharing with them some places that they can get started. And we'll be sure, Heidi's going to send out an email to all of the participants, and in the email give you all the links directly, so you can just, within the email, go to some of these links. We'll also create a PDF file of the PowerPoint presentation and send that out electronically so you can see the wonderful graphs that Robin put together. We'll of course put these on the CARDI website as well, but this will be easier for those of you who participated in the webinar.
Yeah, I was worried that this would be a bit abstract without being able to visit the website. Now it's even more abstract because we didn't have our graphics. So for those of you that have the imagination, you can keep up with this. Thank you very much. But we are, having said all that, this is a new project. I'm very interested in getting some feedback later on as to what parts of this presentation you'd like to hear more on, what should be developed further, what your needs are at the local level in this area, because as I said, the VIEW project is going to have a fairly strong training component to it, what you'd like to see on the website, et cetera, et cetera. So please contact me directly. You can also contact Heidi or Rod, but since I'm working with the View Project directly, it would be great if you could just chat with me too. Do we want to open up for any questions?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, are there any questions that you want to type in? We've been answering a couple as they've come up, but we'll give it a couple minutes and see if anybody...
Heidi, normally you may have done this at the very beginning, you usually talk about how this particular issue is framed within a community sustainability issue. Did you do that at the very beginning?
I would just say, I mean, that's one of the questions we've had with a couple different of the webinars, but I would just say that in order to track where we're going in terms of our communities and ensure that they are sustainable into the future on multiple different levels, from economic development, community development, ecological development, we have to be able to have hard data that says where we are now and where we're going, for all of the reasons that Robin talked about. It's, I think, as important to be able to say we're succeeding or not as to be able to say maybe we need to change our course or something like that. So I would say that particularly just given how kind of chaotic it feels right now and the challenges that we face, I would say it's
You don't have to repeat.
Okay.
Any questions we can ask Robin to answer?
As I said too, I'm really anxious to hear some more comments and feedback from you at a later date. Once you've digested this, and perhaps once you've had a chance to visit some of those links, I really hope that you go back once you do have access to those links and visit the site. Visit the Census Bureau site where I showed the case studies and that have the tutorials. I think that will be enormously helpful. Really pleased to see that was up there, because sometimes the Census Bureau site, while it's good, it's a little overwhelming as sort of a big data dump. But this one section on the case studies and tutorials I thought was really
we are seeing that a lack of comprehensive planning in communities is the biggest issue in grant applications. Thank you for sharing that, Susie. Are there any other final questions that anybody wants to share?
You have to talk into this.
Are there any other final questions that anyone wants to share? But just a couple of moments. Okay, I think with that then, I just want to thank everybody again for joining us and ask you that you join in thanking Robin and Rod for helping us to think through the issues that we need to consider as we access demographic information. And I'm glad, Bev, we just received that. Thank you. I'm glad that you've stuck with us and that it has been helpful. I just want to let you know that you'll receive an email from me later on today with a link to an evaluation of today's webinar. And also, we just really ask that you take time to provide your feedback in terms of the content and what was helpful. And again, at the end, there's a last question that says what would be helpful in terms of webinars. And I know Robin would really appreciate even using that for more information, again, about what would be helpful in terms of demographic data. Along with that mailing, we'll also send you to an online archive of this session. And of course, given that we've had trouble with slides through the presentation, we'll send you the link to the PowerPoint. And I think that we could easily put those websites just on a quick Word document too, that it would just be a list of the demographic information sites. So, and finally, with that, I'll also send you a link to or information about how to register for our next webinar, which is the 4th Tuesday of May, May 26th, and it's going to be on agriculture and farmland protection in New York State. What have New York communities accomplished and what remains to be done? We'll have John Brennan, who's a farmland protection specialist with the New York State Department of Ag and Markets there. David Haight, who's the New York Director of American Farmland Trust. Monica Roth, who's an ag development specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Tompkins County. And David David Kay, an extension associate with CARDI, will also be helping to pull that together. So the description from David is that significant effort has gone into farmland protection programs in recent years. In this webinar, we will assess what has happened, provide an update on the status of existing programs, and consider what needs and opportunities are out there now to kind of move this to the next stage. So we hope you will be able to join us for that. And with that, I think we'll be signing off. Oop, we've got one more.
I was asked for my contact phone number, so my email is listed as rmb18@cornell.edu, and my office number is area code 607-254-6795.
Okay, and with that, we'll sign off. Thank you all again very much for joining us today. Bye.